everybody. I'm Jordan Tenenbaum, social media manager at Celigo. Welcome to Celigo's Technology Leaders podcast. I'm joined as always by Mark Simon, Vice President of Strategy at Celigo, my co-host.
Hello.
And we have a very special guest, Angela Dugan, Vice President of UX at BeyondTrust. Angela, welcome to the podcast. How are you doing today?
Good. How are you?
We are doing fantastic. Very excited to have you on. We're going to jump right in. The first question for you. Do you tell me or tell us or the listeners a little bit about your journey from architect to director of UX to vice president of UX? Kind of how'd you get there and how did it happen and how'd you enjoy it?
Yeah, I actually started as a web developer. That's what I went to college for. And then when I started getting into actually working as a developer, I noticed that I gravitated toward the front end development side of things, and the rest of my team was more than happy to let me do that. Right? Everyone else seemed to want to just do the back end stuff. So I started sketching what I was going to build before I build it, and then I started doing like hallway testing. Like, hey, look at this. Where would you click? What would you do? And I was doing that all still calling myself a web developer. And I had a wonderful gentleman by the name of Joe Soko reach out to me. And he was the director of user experience at the time at the company I was at. And he said, hey, did you know you belonged on my team? And I said, what's user experience? No idea what it was. Didn't know the department existed. And so then he showed me what I was doing was actually user experience research, and I was doing user experience design. And kind of led me down that path. And I think my development background actually lends itself quite well to my career progression and how I ended up where I ended up, because I can, even though I could never code now, it's been so many years that I can kind of still speak the dev speak, and I can relate to the challenges and problems that our engineering teams have, and can help solve those. So that's really how it started. As far as the VP to like architect to director to VP, I was at BeyondTrust for several years as the only UXer. And then when the companies merged, so BeyondTrust, what was Baumgar, and a couple other companies all kind of merged together. And there was like one UXer at each. So suddenly there was a team, and I applied to be the director, and was a successful candidate. And I've grown my team since there. So there was 3 of us to start, and now there's about 30. So
wow.
Yeah.
Wow. That is fantastic. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. That's a pretty sweet journey, and congrats on reaching the VP title. That's very, very exciting. And so obviously you're from BeyondTrust. I don't know why I said BrandTrust, BeyondTrust. And, you talked a little bit about your journey, but for the listeners, could you talk a little bit about what BeyondTrust does, what problems you solve for your customers, and maybe perhaps like a real world example if one's top of mind?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, there's been a lot of shifts in the cybersecurity over the years. And we go back to, there was perimeter security, endpoint security, and now we're really into identity security. And that's really where BeyondTrust is focused right now. We can't, it's really like perimeter and endpoint security are important, but they're just not the be all end all. And that's not where we're seeing the breaches today. So we're really expanding our portfolio. And like I said, we were multiple companies that merged together, and that brought with it this huge kind of broad portfolio. And we're now taking those different aspects of security, whether it's vault or endpoint security or remote sessions, all these things, and bringing them all together to kind of have one solution that encompasses all of the different aspects of security. And we just added something called Insights that really focuses on identity security. So taking data from different connectors, however you want to add into whatever you use, and then putting that into an ML model and spitting out, things that you may want to look at. And one of our customers said, it's great, you don't need a PhD to read it, right? Like, obviously that's my team focusing on, there's a lot of security experts out there that that are kind of thrown into the role. They wear lots and lots of hats. They're asked to do a lot of different things, and they don't have the time or experience or skill set necessarily to do the thorough job that they need to do. And that's where my team is coming in, trying to make sure that our products are more instructive and proactive, and kind of surfacing what's important to the user. And even in the case of insights, telling them exactly what they may want to do about an alert or something that's been surfaced.
Awesome.
Angela, I want to, this is really interesting. And I want to make sure that everybody that's listening really understands this. And I think there's often a lot of tech leaders, business oriented, but security is generally not their strong point. Right. And really, so kind of, and depending on where you're at, something like identity management, that may make a lot of sense to somebody, and they know exactly what value and what's being provided there. Mm-hmm. But I think a lot of times it's sometimes something that's bounced around and referred to, and everyone's not quite crystal clear on what that means. What that's doing is part of the whole security chain, essentially.
Right. So the thing is that you have, especially moving more to the cloud, especially after COVID has really changed kind of the landscape of how we work and where we work. So endpoint security is no longer efficient, right? You need to be able to protect no matter where you're logging in from, what device you're logging in from. So what you need to protect is that those identities, those accounts. And one person, one human can have many, many different accounts all kind of linked together. So you need to be able to protect that account and make sure that if somehow that one of those accounts gets breached, it doesn't create this chain reaction of access by that threat actor, right? So if you have a very good example. So recently, I mean, it's been in the news quite a bit, the Okta breach that recently happened. BeyondTrust was one of the customers affected by that. And our Insights product actually brought that to our attention. So luckily, nothing was accessed on our side. But what the attacker tried to do is something called session hijacking. So our person on our side uploaded a HAR file to the support for Okta. And in that was a cookie, a browser cookie. And that cookie was able to be taken by that attacker and placed in their own browser. So they didn't even need to actually have that login event, right? So you don't even have that as a trigger or something to look at. They were just magically logged in, basically, because they had that token. And the first thing that attacker tried to do was, with that ID that they're already logged in as, is they tried to create an account that looked like a valid account, a valid BeyondTrust account. So our Insights product caught that because of it detects anomalies. So it knew that this account was being used in a weird location. And it surfaced that, and we were able to stop it immediately. We made sure that account wasn't the account that they tried to make wasn't able to be made, and we shut it down. And then we went to Okta and we're like, hey, we noticed this thing. We're pretty sure it's not on our side. And we worked with them to figure out what was exactly going on. And then a couple of weeks later, that's when they did the announcement of what happened. So those are some crazy attacks, right? You didn't need access to any endpoint. You didn't even need access to be able to log in. There was no brute force. These are the kind of more elaborate attacks that we're seeing, and they're really identity based.
That's really interesting. I mean, first the fact the Insights product caught that, so that's awesome. That shows that it really is looking for what's different. It sounds like it's really analyzing those patterns in all your logins, companies' logins and data and everything like that. And then moving up, I mean, this sounds like an attack, an attempt at breaching security or what actually wasn't just an attempt, it was successful security breaches based on actually taking advantage of a security best practice, which is we see larger organizations moving to single sign-on and using different types of identity solutions. And so, I mean, this is, you could look at that and say, wow, that was, if you're following best practice, it actually made you vulnerable if you happen to use this, what would argue is one of the larger players in the market. And that would seem pretty scary to a lot of people, I think.
Sure. I understand that. And obviously providers like this are going to be big targets, right? Because you can do a lot of damage with a single provider. I mean, we saw the LastPass breach, a similar idea, right? Like those big ticket items that attackers are after for lots of different reasons, some financial, some just the cred that they get, I guess. Like there's lots of different motivations for that. But they still diminish that attack surface, right? And they still make, so it brings user experience into security. The great thing about using a provider like Okta is that you have all of these accounts in a single place. It's easy for the user to access them securely. So they don't have reusing the same password everywhere. They're not writing down their passwords. You can share different accounts and things you need so that you're not sending passwords back and forth in an insecure manner. So while it may seem scary, like, oh, Okta was breached, like we shouldn't use it, I wouldn't want to discourage listeners to use a service like that, because overall the surface of your attack area is getting diminished by using something like that. So.
Yeah, and I think that's a really important message, because depending on the size of the organization, say if enterprise companies and larger companies, they're all kind of there. They have security teams, and there's various levels of adoption and investment, how seriously taking and how well they're doing. Generally working towards best practices, that's one thing. But I think on the flip side, you take a lot of like mid-market companies, or especially in the lower half of the mid-market, much less likely to invest in that. And then when they hear things like that, they're even more reluctant to, like the ones that are on the fence. They're really the companies that most need something, that are much more like the most vulnerable to those that have a ton of apps in their organization that they really aren't controlling or on top of. And yet they're the ones that really need that an identity solution, even though it may have been in the news recently and like the Okta, but there's still, I think that takeaway there's still much better off and more overall, much less likely to be a successful target, if they have something in place.
Exactly. Yeah. And like I said, those smaller companies, they don't have giant InfoSec teams to like watch everything. I think one of the other customers that were affected by the Okta breach, it just had a super diligent admin that had his head on a swivel and noticed this, hey, that's not a real account. I know that's not a real account. But if you have these we'll call them InfoSec admin type personas that they also do like 7 other jobs as these smaller companies they do. Yeah. They may not notice that. And can we blame them? Like, that's not their fault. And then you have on top of that not great investment on security tools from those smaller companies. It's just a recipe for disaster, really.
100%. So if we zoom out to 30,000 feet, you're obviously a UX expert. How does good UX lead to good security? Because I've been doing a good amount of research on that for the past week or so before talking to you. And I am no UX expert and I'm no security expert. But in reading some articles that you publish and some blog posts that you publish, it starts to make sense to me. So could you maybe explain that to the audience, how good UX leads to good security?
Sure. I mean, my stance on it is you can't have one without the other. If you have amazing security practices that make it really hard for users to do their day-to-day jobs and be productive, you're pretty much guaranteed that those users are going to find a way around those security practices. And typically those types of things that they will do to get around them are even less secure than if you did nothing at all. So it's really, really important to think about the user's end experience when you're doing things like creating policies, things like that, limiting what they can have access to. When if you don't make it easy to continue to be effective in their own job, then you make it more likely that they're going to find a way around doing or adhering to the security policies. So it's really, really important. Maybe something that up until more recently wasn't super focused on, I think. It was really focused on, oh, we're going to lock this down, we're going to lock this down, and people just have to deal. And that's not how you make friends either, let's be honest. The security, you'll hear lots of people in InfoSec teams say, like, they're not, they're kind of like the person that when they come on, everybody kind of groans like, oh no, here we go. So,
I've never done that, I promise.
So I think it's really important to think about the end user and what you're doing and how it affects them. I mean, super easy example of that is the password rotation. So mandatory password rotation used to be a best security practice. And what you ended up with is everybody had passwords because they were not only forced to change them every quarter, say, but then it had to be new. It couldn't be one they used before. It had to have a certain number of characters, obviously, numbers, letters, things like that. You can't expect people to remember that. I mean, it's
end
just
up writing them down
crazy,
at that point.
right? You write them down. But what you ended up getting was like everyone had the same password. You know why? Because it was like winter 2023. Like this is what happened, because you weren't, yes, in your, if you think through it from a security practice, that makes total sense, right? Oh, make them change their password every quarter. That'll make the password more secure. But you're not considering the user at the end of that flow and what they will do to compensate and what they need to do to be effective in their job and to continue on with their day-to-day. And they don't care about security as much as you do. So they're just going to do whatever makes it easiest for them.
Makes total sense.
That does make a lot of sense. And I think it's a huge part of the overall user experience is a huge part of, like, I see this of security and resistance to adoption. And even this having been very close to security in the past, in different forms, and even having our head of security and compliance like report into me when we were a smaller company at Sligo. So I'm very close to this and very familiar and ultimately responsible. So you think, okay, well, I'm well informed, I'm pretty well educated on it, come from a technical background, and I still find myself personally annoyed by the amount of multi-factor authentication, and it's all a little bit different. And then, the text, and it's like, okay, now the text doesn't come through, or I got to find the app, or where did I put my phone? Then I got to go to the authenticator app. And I'm always like, this is better. And I get it. But I'm always like, there's a massive opportunity for this to be great. And it's not quite great yet. But I do appreciate having some of the single sign-on aspects, for example, versus hunting things down. But I still look at them like, this is awfully clunky. Still, like, it's not quite there. And I mean, again, that's experience that's coming out of that user experience. It creates this sort of natural resistance. And I feel like, well, if I feel resistant, like, and I get it, I would say more than the average person. I was like, how does the average person must feel? I feel like this is just right. I mean, it just must drive them nuts, I think,
you can ask me, Mark, I'll tell you. Well, so with that in mind, with the average user being challenged or maybe annoyed by the need for security systems and things of that nature, and with your experience in UX, I guess what's next at BeyondTrust? And maybe there's like a product or a release coming out, or maybe it's overall design principles, but what's next to kind of like assuage some of the challenge that users experience when dealing with security protocols?
Yeah, I think like it's a couple things, right? So it's that insights product and bringing, connecting to all our existing products. So if you have more than one of our products, making those work together more seamlessly. Again, that overworked, IT admin persona that we're talking about, insights kind of bubbles up the things you need to know about and doesn't give you alert fatigue. That's the other thing that my team's super focused on, because it's great for you to tell the user all the things that they should look at and action on. But if you do that too much, the alerts are just noise and they're not going to look at them, right? The other thing, our remote support product is really great in the sense that it's making it easy for the end user specifically. So, you just get the help desk person sends you a file, you open it, you allow access. That support person can get into your system, see the problem that you're having, help you fix it, and then when they end the session, and then they no longer have access, right? So, but it's super easy. Anyone can do it, and that's really what we keep focusing on. As far as from the what we plan to do more of, there's a few things. So, more instruction in the applications that we have today, more guidance, like in-product guidance, in-product help. So you don't need to read a big manual to understand how to do the next thing. Just improving the usability of our products in general, so you don't even feel the need to get that manual out, because it's just very clear, the flow across the screen. The other thing my team, I've pushed them to be more focused on is accessibility. That's really important in this age. And accessibility really causes good usability for everyone. And there's quite a large percentage of the population that has or will have at least some type of disability in their lifetime. And, we see it super severe, but also, your eyes aren't so great after a while, or that really affects anyone. Or maybe you break your right arm. You can't use that mouse anymore for a certain number of weeks. Like, can you use all the applications and things that you're used to using every day? So trying to make our applications more accessible and usable for everyone. And that's a good thing it's a good thing to do. It's the right thing to do. But it also is just good for business. There's more and more lawsuits happening in the United States and Europe specifically around accessibility and products not being accessible, and companies getting sued for using products that aren't accessible. So we definitely don't want to be contribute anything like that for our customers, and we want to make sure that they're covered there too.
It's fantastic. The first thing I thought it was someone who's like colorblind, and when it says like within CAPTCHA and it says like click all the red lights in the well, I don't know, I can't see red. What do I do? I can't get into Facebook. Like, thanks a lot.
Exactly.
So important. So important. That's go ahead, Mike.
I see that within our own product. It came up recently in a thread around that. Just and you see, it's like, oh, like so many of us, you don't like the color blindness one in particular, being like, oh yeah, those dots are color based and they're telling you something, but not if you can't discern red from green. And so it's like, oh, it's just kind of a light bulb that went off in a lot of people's heads. It was like, oh, that's probably not the right, but a little change in the design still gives context, right? If you think of the way a stoplight's designed or something, like, it doesn't have to be so, it can be dependent on other things. You can still convey. So I think it's interesting how you kind of go through and then you're like, oh wow, somebody may not comprehend this at all, something that we like really take as very, very foundational. And I think that's quite fascinating. But it leads me to ask a question now. Like, this seems like an area of further of like sort of very near-term progress in UX. But what are the next big things that you see coming, Angela? What are the big things out there? What's really going to change the space? Is there anything that you see coming that's going to be really revolutionary from a user experience perspective?
I mean, you can't ignore AI, as much as I know it's a little bit of a buzzword, but that natural language and being able to interact with products using natural language. So when you're searching for something, when you're asking a question, getting that natural language response back. And we often joke in my team that the best UI is no UI. And we kind of mean that, right? Like if there is you can just ask imagine if you could, in a world where you could just ask to create a policy, right? I just want these endpoints with like these attributes to do this thing and be grouped in this way. And you could just like literally type that as a natural language thing, and then boom, policy's created. Like, how much easier is that than like dragging and dropping all the things and checking all the check boxes? And then like, I think that's probably where we're going, as we pull in more machine learning. We are developing machine learning, like I said, with the insights product, detections and recommendations, like being able to spot those anomalies. That's where it's going for security. And then for user experience, I think it is just being able to interact with products like you would interact with a human. Just that natural conversational type language makes it much easier to do things.
It kind of mimics, like, it's a little different, but Soligo, we do a lot of like our product is considered low code, no code, and it kind of democratizes access and usability within the product. And it seems like having like this no UI where anyone can ask, your platform to create or implement something without having to be as technical as possible. It kind of even ties into like, what we were talking about in terms of people with disabilities, not necessarily being able to access something, but it really just democratizes software, or AI democratizes software for everyone to be able to use and interact with it, regardless of skill, regardless of education, regardless of, security experience. And so it's just cool to hear how you're kind of like bringing that to the masses. It'll be very interesting in the next few years to see how that continues to expand and grow.
Yeah, I think there's such a need for it too, right? I mean, if you had asked me 10 years ago to like give you a general persona of our users, I mean, they probably would have, like, especially our admin users, they would have been pretty technical. They would have had a degree or two under their belt around around technology. They would have had security experience. That's just not the case today. Like, there's just not enough security experts out there. So companies are forced to hire people with different types of skill sets that they can kind of pigeonhole into these roles, right? So you need these security products need to up their game from a usability perspective, because the users are not super highly technical anymore.
Interesting.
That makes a lot of sense, especially based on kind of the way that we look at automation. The same thing, moving away from very developer centric to more like we call it, Gartner calls it business technologists. So tech savvy business users, whatever one you term. So it's moving away. And what I heard you just describe is really the same thing happening in security, that less and less technical of security teams or security and compliance teams, but a little more like less leaning in that traditional tech background. And then that must create do you think that creates more demand or challenge for your product, or does it create more of an opportunity? How do you look at that? Is it good or bad?
I mean, I like to look at things as opportunities. I don't think I would have survived as long as I did in the industry if it wasn't for a bit of grit, perseverance, and a bit of positivity.
Yeah.
But yeah, it is an opportunity. This isn't going away, and it can't. Right? Security is here to stay, and we need to be more vigilant than ever. Again, after the pandemic, things have really, we knew that the industry was going in this direction, but it was given a violent shove in this direction. And now people can work from anywhere on any device, may not even have to be a business, issue device. And how do you keep all of that straight with, I think the last stat I saw was like 60% of IT security professionals are from non-traditional backgrounds. So, I mean, your attack surface is getting bigger and bigger, and the threat actors out there, they're getting more and more hungry, and there's more and more of them, because it's big money, it's big business, unfortunately. And how do you stay one step ahead of that? So
it's not easy, that's for
definitely
not. So if I look at the landscape of technology security companies, there's a lot out there, and for someone like me, it's relatively overwhelming, because I don't know every single thing that all of these companies do. And when a company is evaluating who to choose, whether it's BeyondTrust or additional provider, I'm sure they have a lot to consider. And so, whether we're talking about in general or from a UX perspective, how does a technology security company stand out from the competition? Like, what makes them shine?
I mean, for us, what makes us different is we're customer centric. We have amazing NPS scores. We care about our customers. Our customer support is amazing. And that translates through the whole company. The whole company is customer centric. And that, again, that I think shows why the team that I have is as large as it is, because obviously we're very focused on the customer, the users of our products and what they need. And the values, our core values, really lean into that as well. And our core values are not just, I'll say BeyondTrust's core values are not just writing on a page, like we live them. So if I'm looking for something, yeah, I might look at the Gartner Magic Quadrant, especially if I'm a larger company. And we're up there. I think we're first in one and second in the other. But it's really about, you need a partner. That's what you should be looking for. Not just like checking the boxes of this compliance and this feature. And trust me, you can go through those features and go line by line and be like, well, this one has more features, so I'll pick this one. Well, how many you're actually going to use? Is that really how you want to evaluate this? Instead, looking for someone who wants a company that wants to partner with you. Like I have a whole research team on my team, and like they are so eager to talk to our customers, and those customers are given the opportunity to shape those products. We have product advisory councils, which is just customer groups, user groups of real users that we meet with to talk about the challenge that they're having, talk about the things that they're seeing, what they wish they had, their pain points and frustrations. And we listen to all of that, and all of that feedback goes into our roadmap, goes into get prioritized and product management is equally invested in that as we are from a user experience team. So to me, it's really, you should be looking for that partner, someone that can partner with you, that cares about you and cares about those outcomes that you're after.
That's awesome.
You mentioned Gartner there again. And what I think is interesting about that is I saw that BeyondTrust was in the Gartner Peer Insights customer choice. And everyone always thinks of the Magic Quadrant and how important that is, but I always like to think that like the customer's choice, like that's customer feedback, right? Actually users. I was like, that's real. I mean, that really speaks to it in a much bigger way than what, say, a group of analysts or industry leaders kind of come up with. Is like, well, do customers really, like, how is their experience? Do they really enjoy it? Is it positive working with the solution? Would you agree that that's for someone out there thinking about choosing software, security software, any software? Do you think that looking at the customer choice and who's recognized there, is that more important than your traditional Magic Quadrant or Wave or any other shaping mechanism somebody has to put software in some sort of ranked format?
I'm not going to badmouth the analysts, because they know, they're way smarter than I am. They know way more about this than I do. But I think it's a factor that you should consider. And a lot of our prospects come from, oh, you're in the quadrant. We only ask what, we only look at companies that are in that quadrant. And those are typically the bigger companies. But again, I think, you really got to look at those customer reviews and understand, like, what kind of company am I in business with here? Because security it's a personal thing. Every company's network and it's different for every single one. And and your compliance regulations, what you need, your outcomes that you're after are all slightly different. There's no real cookie cutter solution. And having a company that understands that and wants to talk to you personally is really, really important.
That's
yeah,
awesome.
That makes a lot of sense.
So we've talked a lot about the importance of security, and for those who aren't in security, I guess the first part of my question is how do you get people to care about security? And I'll leave that as kind of like the overall umbrella. But you wrote an article recently that talked about tips for designing a system. Don't use fear as a motivator to follow security practices, celebrating users' participation in security, explaining why to your users, and planning for mistakes. And I think all of those are fantastic to get someone like me to adhere to security policy or protocols. But I don't know if that's going to make me care about it. And that has nothing to do with you. That's just the way that my brain is. And probably a lot of other people who hate CAPTCHAs and things like that. So with that in mind, I think you're almost all the way there, but explaining to our listeners, how do you get people like me to care about security?
Explaining the why. I mean, if you really explain the why do I need to fill in this CAPTCHA? This is stupid. This takes time. I don't understand. How have you ever seen a CAPTCHA that just had like a sentence underneath it explaining why you needed to do it?
No.
If you think that maybe people wouldn't be so annoyed if they knew why it was important.
100%.
Right?
Yeah.
We're not, we're users. We may not be security experts, but we're not dummies. We know that. I think most people who are on a device connected to the internet understand that there is some risk there, right? And then just explaining how we're helping protect you or your company or whatever it is, your device can go a long way. Just meeting people where they are and treating them like human beings they have feelings and concerns and questions, and just trying to answer those up front and explain why we're doing this. And we're doing this because we're trying to protect you. That's all you need to do.
You used an interesting word there. You said because we're trying to protect you. And one of my favorite, I guess, statisticians of all time is a guy named Robert Cialdini, and he did a test recently that said if you ask someone to cut in line, maybe you'll be successful 20% of the time. But if you give them a reason and say, hey, can I cut you in line because I need to do XYZ, go to the doctor, fix my car, pick up my kid. If you say the word because and then explain why, the odds jump up to like 60%. And if you can explain within a CAPTCHA, hey, we're doing this because XYZ, it saves 99% of attacks. It will save your business $10,000 a minute. It will prevent your personal data from being put on the internet. Just that little explanation. And I didn't even put that together until you said the word because, but it's so obvious that you need to just explain why. And I don't want to do something for no reason, but if there is a reason, even if it takes me an extra 2 seconds, I'll do it. And so just the explaining that why is really important. And I hope that your attitude is adopted more throughout not only security products, but just in general, because, well, I'm saying because it will really help people adopt and care about these kinds of things and understand and just be smarter in general. Like I love learning and I want to know why I'm doing XYZ, and your little explanation, whether it's a question mark that I hover my mouse over, or it's just a pop-up, or it's just a line right under it that tells me why I'm doing it, I'll feel a lot better about it. And that's really cool to hear you say. I kind of all just came together in my brain. It's great.
That's awesome. And I mean, that goes for security training too. Lots and lots of companies have like phishing training, things like that. Explain to your employees why you're doing it. It's not that hard, but they're going to be way more invested and pay way more attention to the training if you just explain the why.
1000%. I have a few questions to wrap up because we're close to the end of time. But before I do that, Mark, I'm curious if I want to at least throw you a bone. Any last minute questions that you've had brewing around in your head?
I'm curious, like where we've talked about kind of security here. I mean, Angela, what you think of like for how what's next for the security space in general? Like what's that next, like where is it going? How will it look different in 10 years than it does now?
I think again, it's going back to those identities and securing access, not endpoints, not assets, but the access. Because that's nearly every breach. The common thread is that you compromise the right identity that has the right level of access, and that's just game over because that just causes them to be able to create another, it could be completely separate department and just allows them the pathways to get through and to get to where they need to get, where they can be really, really impactful in a very negative way. Also, I can't remember the stats on this, but typically they're in your system for months, maybe even years before you know. So it's really about, I think that's just the future of security is really being able to detect those anomalies, understand, but then surface it to the right people, whatever product that you're using, but surfacing it without that alert fatigue. So there's this balance that you have to create. And then hopefully we get to the point where, our users trust those products enough to automate some of that. So to take that off their plates. Whenever this happens, like block that. Just, I don't even need to see the alert anymore. I'll look at a summary every week or whatever. So more instructive and more automation, I think, is where we're going.
Awesome.
Makes a lot of sense.
Thank you for that. And so something that Mark and I have been pretty passionate about with the podcast is just ensuring that we truly have a diverse group of folks. Also, I'm super impressed. That's the first drink of water you've had. You've been talking a lot, so that's amazing. I've been like chugging tea like it's nothing. Anyways, we've been focused a lot about kind of promoting diversity, and within the tech space, within the security space, obviously, there's definitely a lack of women. And so, two questions for you as a woman, as a VP leader in the tech space and the security space. Maybe let's go back 10, 15 years. What's a few things you wish you had known before kind of embarking on this journey? And then after you answer that, I have one more question about that, but let's start with that.
What I wish I knew. When I first started in tech, there were not very many women. What did I start? 2002?
A few years ago.
Yeah, a few years ago. And what I did, instinctually, whether it was conscious or not, I tried to fit in with my coworkers, who were all men, pretty much. And a side effect of that is I actually suppressed some of my more feminine qualities. So compassion, empathy, talking about the why, how I feel, things like that. I really suppressed that. And that was my default for a long time, more than I care to admit. It wasn't until I had some pretty amazing women mentors in my life that I started to understand that by doing that, I was doing myself a disservice, because I was pretending to be kind of something that I wasn't. But also just doing the people on my team, the people that I worked with, a disservice too. I think that compassion, that empathy, and my transparency and openness actually makes me a better leader. I think it makes a better team environment, a better culture. And I wish that I had have known that back then, so that I didn't do that to myself and to the people around me.
Yeah, staying true to yourself is, especially when it's, you're a minority within a bigger community, is so important. And especially when you're dealing with user experience, a lot of those qualities that you mentioned are really important, like the why, including all of the others that you mentioned. But yeah, it's just, it really helps what you create be a lot more well-rounded. And then I guess the second part to this question is, for women today, whether they're in the tech world or not, whether they're in the security space or not, do you have any words of encouragement or inspiration or advice to women today, in terms of how they can be successful, how they can grow within their role?
I think there's two things that I encourage women to do, and that's find sponsors and find mentors. So sponsors are people in the company, whether they're in your department or not, maybe even just in the industry, whether they're in your company or not, that they have your back. They're in your corner. They understand the value that you bring, and they're the people that mention your name in a room that you're not in. That is so extremely important, especially for women. It's important for everyone, but it's really important for women, because we tend to take up a little less space, not be as noisy. And that's just qualities that we've had from, kind of ways we've been taught from birth, whether right or wrong. That is the way that typical culture is right now anyway. So having those sponsors, people that will speak up on your behalf, is so, so important. And then with mentorship, I mentioned I have had a string of wonderful female mentors that have brought out the best in me. They also, having a mentor, whether they're male or female, yes, you learn a lot from them. You gain, you can gain from their experience, but they also make you not feel so alone. The problem, what we see with women, is not in the classroom. I think women typically make up about half or even more than half of university students. It's retention. It's in the end. The first 5 years, the dropout rate is insane. And a big, big part of that is because women feel really isolated and really alone in male-dominated fields. So getting yourself a mentor, collaborating with other women, and then allies as well. I've had a great male mentor who was super, he was raised by a single mom. He just understood, even though he was a man. There are people out there that care and want you to succeed, and seeking them out and getting guidance from them is so important.
That's fantastic advice. And definitely makes a lot of sense. And I appreciate you explaining the why, because it just makes it very clear to me and our listeners. And you're very good at that. The last question I have before we go, because I know we want to end on time and not take up too much of your day, but I always say this at the end of every podcast, but I like to make sure that the people listening know that these VP and C-level executives that we have are real people. They're not just robots working all day who you plug in and recharge their battery via USB-C. You are a person outside of work, and so maybe could you tell us a little bit about your passions, hobbies, or interests away from the work sphere?
Sure. I'm a mom. I have an 11-year-old daughter who acts like she's about 16. And she's super, super extroverted, and I am very introverted. So it's a challenge. She's into a lot of, she plays basketball. She wants to go to every event party. And it's a lot. So I need a lot of recharge time. So I like to read fiction in my downtime. I like to just kind of snuggle up on the couch. That's my happy place. I'm a typical introvert in the sense that I have a few friends, but they're good friends. Yeah, and I love one of my favorite. We moved to a new home during COVID, so it was crazy. But I live in the city of Halifax, so it's a larger city, but small, I guess, compared to a lot of U.S. cities. But the property that we have has like a pretty big yard for a city lot. So I got into gardening. And one of my favorite things to do is to listen to podcasts and garden, because you're reading and stuff. You don't really need to be thinking about it. So I listen to podcasts and audiobooks and garden. And that's one of my favorite things to do.
That's fantastic. That's really cool to hear. I'm a cactus collector, so I'll send you a photo of my collection. We can talk about gardening off camera. But what I will say is, thank you a ton, Angela, for joining us. This has been really cool, because for someone like me who doesn't really know a ton of security, you made it incredibly accessible and understandable. So for those listening, Angela, thank you a ton for joining us on the Technology Leaders Podcast. Mark Simon, our VP of Strategy, thank you a ton for being a wonderful co-host. Folks, we'll see you in about a week or so for another episode. Thanks for listening, and see y'all around. Bye, everybody.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
Bye.